I had hooked up with this particular woman 2 or 3 times. Very nice. Our conversations had always been dope. We went on a date the first time, didn't do anything, and then we had kind of fucked around after that. And it was after we had sex the 4th time where she came over, we were hanging out, and she just casually told me she was a drug runner. We had argued with each other, not argued, but we had kind of had a disagreement about someone's moral position, and I kind of told you, hey, don't automatically assume that your moral position is the end all be all. And I think the more I kind of toil over it in my head, morality is so subjective now. There's certain things that we as a society can agree upon in terms of killing is bad, cheating is bad, all this different type of stuff. If cheating is bad, you get some dissenting opinions, especially with the fresh and fit guys. But I think where the subjectivity comes in is how people interpret those things, or even on a more micro level with certain morally gray topics. I just think morality is way too subjective to ever feel like your one opinion is the end all be all, or that you kind of have a moralistic centric view of things. I think that's a very erroneous way of going about things. And I think that's kind of the way Soul Illuminati is approaching this. Because we think as a society, excuse me, that the pursuit of money is automatically soulless or this immoral thing. You see that a lot. We had one of the conversations on one of our first podcasts, I think the first episode of this podcast, where we talked about people getting flown out, or it might have been one of the JCS episodes. We talked about people getting flown out for money. And you had argued that that was a little bit more immoral. I just tend to think that if you like money, that's not necessarily, it doesn't make you a bad dude. That doesn't make you a soulless guy. That shouldn't be the only thing, in my personal opinion, depending on my moral code, or I guess according to my moral code, that's not the only thing you should chase. But if that's what you're after, I just don't think that automatically makes you this evil guy.
And I remember when we were discussing it, and my point being, or where I was coming from, was more of a for lack of a better term, a moral high ground. And when we first had this conversation, and I was speaking from where I stood and my moral sense, and just kind of saying that, like, I would never fly out any woman to just have them here, mess around with them and then send them back home, because to me, you're not gaining anything from that except momentary pleasure, right? But real quick, I just want to challenge that. Then what's wrong with momentary pleasure? And that's kind of what the disagreement I think we're still having, is that momentary pleasure is this thing, especially now with hustle culture, that's looked down upon, right? In small amounts, if I work hard, and this is kind of what I do now, I have a few people that I'm seeing casually. So if we're working hard the entire day, and I say to a girl, hey, do you want to come over to my place later around like 8 or 9? You could hang for a couple of hours. We could have some fun. Do we want to maybe watch a couple shows? And then that's that. Would you say that that's immoral? Because that is momentary pleasure. I'm taking time out of my work-filled day to give myself some personal enjoyment. Or would you say that there's a balance to that, I guess is what I want to ask. Okay, I think from where I stand looking at that, I can see why you would say that there is a balance there. And it's not that I don't see the balance and how, like, it was all consensual and everything. And, you actually came over, everything went fine, and you took a break from your work day. I guess where I'm coming more from is how, it affects the more that you do it, the more that you start to not want to do it anymore, And I've seen that with many people who I'm close with. I've seen that. I don't want to say I've seen that with you yet, but we did have a conversation about it where you were kind of moving away from the mindset of just having what people deem meaningless sex, right? And instead, well, you want to say something?
Yeah, well, I want you to finish your point because I'll push back on a couple of things, but let me let you finish your point.
All right. Yeah, you would what some people deem meaningless sex, and just instead trying to work more on yourself and allow yourself to be in the right position to where you can meet somebody who you can have a better connection with, and I guess add more meaning to that sexual lifestyle. I think for me, while I've engaged in what people deem as meaningless sex, and just I haven't enjoyed every experience that I've left. I think that where I stand very clearly is I would much rather just be in a relationship with somebody before anything of sex even comes up. I don't want to share that side of myself with somebody who I had just met. I don't want to share that side of myself with somebody who we are simply in a talking phase. I would much rather get into a relationship with somebody before any of that happens, you know, and then we'll continue on from there. I don't like giving that part of myself to people before a commitment has been made, because I feel like I would be sharing something with somebody, or them sharing something with me that is not needed to be shared at that moment, right? And that kind of goes back to my belief system, but that's primarily where I stand on that. I just don't like, for me at least, I don't like sharing that in those experiences with somebody who could potentially be temporary in my life. And
I have a couple of questions.
Like I said, I have done that in the past. You know, I've had experiences, so I can't sit here and say that I'm perfect. I've never done that, but as I've had those experiences, I've kind of come back to where I'm talking to you right now. If that makes sense.
Yes, I want to ask a couple of questions. Mm-hmm. One, you say I don't want to show that side of me too early. I want to know, first off. Yeah, actually, you know what? I'm going to ask the first part of this question first, and I'll ask that part of that question second. So I'll grant you that we did have that conversation where I said I think I'm having too much meaningless sex, where I'm chasing some sort of an ego trip type of thing, and I'm constantly having to prove to myself that I can, and I'm just being very blatantly honest for the people listening, because I think that's what they would want, you know, constantly proving to myself that I can please a woman or whatever it is. You know, that I'm validated, right? Constantly chasing validation. My first question would be to you though, is that immoral? Because we had a conversation, and the parameters for the conversation was not, is this moral? The parameters for the conversation, that I remember it, was, does this work for me? Is it going to be conducive to my life? So I don't think that we approach that from a morality standpoint. And I guess I have two actual really questions after that is, do you view this from a morality type of perspective? Can you take the morality out of this? And three, what about showing that side of yourself to a partner so early in a relationship troubles you so much? Because I view it as almost a different level of personal. It's a very personal thing. Now, I think where you would come at it, and again, you could feel free to state your perspective and let me know if I'm mischaracterizing your position here. You would kind of look at it as, if I'm showing my part of myself, or this part of myself specifically, to someone, and we've just started talking, that there's something morally wrong with that, or that there's something. That's the thing. I guess I just don't understand why you are against it in a way. Like why you're so. Yeah, that's my whole thing. And then also the third thing is again, why. Just why? There's still so many questions, but I want to know, because for me, it's kind of, and this is what I wanted to say, for me, I view it from the lens of, I'm I've got a high drive. I'm not going to say, what the guys listening to this know what I'm talking about, like a high sex drive.
You know what I'm
talking, you know what I'm about.
You know.
And so for me, it's not a thing of showing too much myself off the bat. I've always been a very open person, like I'm talking about it on this podcast here, with everything in my life, with my downsides, with my upsides, with my troubles. I mean, Josh, I've talked to people, I've talked to you about very personal things that I think a lot of other people would keep quiet or wouldn't espouse to other people. And to me, sex is the same way. I understand it's a close, and again, it's a very, very intimate thing, but I personally don't have a problem with showing that side of myself or indulging in that side of someone else early on, where I think it could become, and again, not a bad thing in terms of morality wise, but maybe not the smartest thing in the world, is if you get into a relationship and you focus much more on the sexual side before getting to know the person, because then that could lead to all different types of trouble down the road, where you don't know what that person's personality is like. You could absolutely despise that person. You could get annoyed by them. And then you've just had sex with them and you have to hang out with them. And then it sucks. So sometimes I'll grant you that you can rush into things. But I don't think that that's immoral. I just want to see why you think it's bad. And can you answer that question? I'm pushing you a little bit more this podcast in a very friendly way. I'm not trying to like expose you or anything, but I find it very interesting when you say these things because I don't know where what the backbone of why you think it's bad, where that's coming from.
Okay.
And I yield the mic to you, sir.
Oh, thanks, bro. Appreciate you, bro. All right. So I think where we ended off this conversation on the last time we talked about it is that I came to the conclusion that I guess from a morality standpoint, like it's kind of hard to state why it's bad. I can only really state why it's bad based on what I've experienced, and then there comes I. So it's a lot of me and what I feel. But
is that morally bad?
That's what I'm saying.
But this begs the question. We have to be very careful with what we say here. Is it morally bad? Because I know the things that have happened to you, and they're terrible. But does that make that thing morally bad, or is that a bad outcome that happened to you where certain immoral things happened? So does that make the act itself immoral, or is it the fact that you just got a couple of bad cases? You know, because I've had my fair share of bad experiences, but I've also had very good experiences that have stemmed from having a strictly sexual relationship. I've known some of my best friends. I went to Italy with one of my friends that I lost my virginity to. We had a pretty concurrent relationship about 8 months when she was in the States, and I still consider her a very good friend to this day, even if we didn't do anything sexual. So what I'm trying to see is, because you had these bad things happen to you, is that why you feel like it's immoral? And if that's the question that we're talking about, then perhaps there's more digging to be done.
Mm-hmm. For me, or for what I've experienced or what I've seen, is a lot of times the moment that you add in the sexual things and stuff of that nature, it kind of speeds up the relationship, and now you guys might be discussing more things that you would have been discussing if you guys just kind of kept things at a natural, steady grow, and you guys spend time getting to know each other. And now you don't have the questions anymore about, if I should be or whatnot. I feel like you kind of leave that out in the open if you jump straight into doing sexual acts and you've only known the person for a little bit. What's up?
Is that still morally bad, or could that just be considered a little bit stupid sometimes? And also, if you're pursuing the type of relationship that I'm pursuing, which is not anything where I want to... There's one person that I've met up with a few times that I haven't done anything sexual with just because there hasn't been the opening there, but I do really value her time. And listen, I can talk to all the people that I can have. I'm also a guy that I will grant you this point, I do like to have conversation and be able to converse with the people that I have sexual relations with. But I guess what you're framing it through, because I know you're a guy that likes to be in a relationship rather than kind of sleep around. I think you're framing it through the lens that everyone automatically, if they're going to have sex with someone, wants to pursue. Like with the people that I have sexual stuff with now, I'm not looking to them for more than just temporary pleasure for both sides. And morally, I don't think there's anything wrong with that. It's a fair exchange. I get pleasure, she gets pleasure, and we hang out afterwards. And it's a stress reliever.
How do you feel about? Have you ever heard that, like, when you share that part of yourself with somebody, that you might take a little bit of them with you? Have you ever heard that before?
No, but to that, and that's a very interesting idea that we could kind of talk about. I like. Let's go down that kind of rabbit hole. Let's go down that thought process. If you take a little bit of everyone with you, I'd argue that's one of the healthiest things you can do in life, to have a very holistic experience. Because we view, and I was also doing a lot of thinking about this in just the past week and even some of this week. What's the best way to have a life? What's the best way to live a really nice life? I think or not a nice life, but a virtuistic life, like a life that helps other people out and allows you to live to the maximum capacity that you can live. I'd argue that one of the tenets or one of the pillars of that is having a well-rounded worldview, right? So I'll never forget, and I'll say this, it's just crazy. I had hooked up with this particular woman 2 or 3 times. Very nice. Our conversations had always been dope. We went on a date the first time, didn't do anything, and then we had kind of fucked around after that. And it was after we had sex the fourth time where she came over, we were hanging out, and she just casually told me she was a drug runner. Casually. I was just like, what? She was like, she goes, I got a delivery I gotta do later. I was like, oh, you delivering for DoorDash or like you Uber Eats? Like, what are we talking about here?
And she's like, no, I got.
Basically, she was like, no, yeah, I just run drugs. I run, it ran really elementary level stuff. So nothing hard, weed, Adderall, I think a little bit of Coke. It was very interesting. It was very interesting in that, I had, to your point, kind of shared a vulnerable part of my life with this person, that they were so, because you're right, it is kind of a conduit. Sex is a conduit because it is so, that sounds like condiment. It's such a vulnerable experience that you're sharing with someone that you're right. You take something with you. Like, am I ever going to forget that she told that to me? No. And I have other partners that I've learned a lot about just after the conversations we've had after sex, but I don't think that's a bad thing. And I don't know if that's what you were saying, or I don't know if that's what you were asserting, but I don't think that's a bad thing at all. In fact, I think the more experience you have, the better.